The gavel was about to come down. Judge Patricia Williams had that look in her eyes, the one that said she'd already made up her mind. My ex-husband Michael sat there in his perfectly pressed navy suit, the same confident smile spreading across his face that I'd seen 1,000 times before. The same smile that once made me fall in love with him, and the same smile that had haunted my nightmares for the past 3 years. Emma, my 6-year-old daughter, sat beside me on the wooden bench, her tiny legs barely reaching the floor. Her small hands clutched her pink backpack like it held all the secrets in the world. She'd been unusually quiet that morning, more so than usual for a child who preferred drawing to talking anyway. I thought it was just nerves. After all, what 6-year-old wants to sit in a courtroom while adults decide where she'll live for the rest of her childhood? The judge cleared her throat and leaned forward slightly. Based on the testimony presented today and the evidence submitted, it appears that Mr. Rodriguez has demonstrated a more stable living environment and financial security for the minor child. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My heart stopped beating. This couldn't be happening. Not after everything we'd been through. Not after I'd finally found the courage to leave him. However, Judge Williams continued, before I make my final ruling, I want to hear directly from Emma. Young lady, your father says you've expressed that you'd like to live with him. Is that true? The courtroom fell silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic outside. Every eye in the room turned to my little girl, who suddenly looked even smaller than her 6 years. I wanted to reach out and pull her into my arms, to shield her from this impossible question that no child should ever have to answer. Emma stood up slowly, her backpack still clutched against her chest. Instead of answering right away, she looked up at me with those dark eyes that held too much wisdom for someone so young. Then she did something that made my blood run cold and gave me hope all at the same time. She reached into her backpack and pulled out her old iPad mini, the one my mother had given her for educational games. Your Honor, she said in that clear, small voice that somehow carried across the entire courtroom. May I please show you something first? My name is Sarah Chen, and that moment in the courtroom was when my entire world balanced on a knife's edge. 3 years of rebuilding our lives, 3 years of working double shifts and sleeping on my mother's couch, 3 years of Emma asking why Daddy didn't live with us anymore, all came down to whatever was on that iPad. I'd been fighting this custody battle for 6 months, ever since Michael decided he wanted to play Father of the Year. The irony wasn't lost on me that the same man who barely acknowledged Emma's existence when we were married suddenly couldn't live without her once I filed for divorce. But that's how Michael operated. He only wanted things when he realized he couldn't have them. The courtroom itself felt like a stage where my life was being performed for an audience of strangers. Judge Williams, a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and kind but tired eyes, had seen hundreds of cases like mine. At least I thought she had. David Park, my lawyer, was young and earnest, fresh out of law school and working for legal aid. He believed in justice and fairness, concepts that felt foreign to me after years of living with Michael. Across the aisle sat Rebecca Stone, Michael's attorney, a woman who charged $500 an hour and looked like she could argue black was white if the price was right. But it was Michael himself who commanded the room without even trying. At 35, he still had that magnetic presence that had drawn me to him when I was 24 and fresh out of college. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his suit probably cost more than I made in a month, and his smile suggested he was doing everyone a favor just by being there. He'd built his reputation as one of Cedar Falls's most successful real estate agents, and he wore that success like armor. Emma, meanwhile, was the smallest person in the room, but somehow the most important. At 6 years old, she was serious in the way children become when they've had to grow up too fast. She loved to draw pictures of cats and houses with too many windows, and she had this habit of humming quietly to herself when she was thinking. She was bilingual, switching effortlessly between English and the Mandarin my mother spoke with her, and she had an artist's eye for details that adults often missed. "What exactly do you want to show the court, Emma?" Judge Williams asked, her voice gentler now that she was addressing a child directly. Emma held up the iPad with both hands, like she was presenting a treasure. "I recorded something," she said simply. "I record myself singing sometimes and telling stories like Nai taught me. But this time, I recorded something else." The sow, change in Michael's demeanor was almost imperceptible, but I caught it. The confident smile flickered for just a moment, and his left hand, the one that used to squeeze my arm too tightly when he was angry, clenched into a fist on the table. "When did you make this recording, sweetheart?" Judge Williams continued. "Last weekend," Emma replied, "when I was at Daddy's house." David Park shot me a glance, his eyebrows raised slightly. We hadn't known about any recording. Emma had never mentioned it during our preparation sessions, and I certainly hadn't. Coached her to make one. The realization that my 6-year-old daughter had taken it upon herself to document something, anything, from her visits with Michael made my stomach churn with equal parts pride and terror. "Your Honor," Rebecca Stone interjected, rising from her chair, "I object to the introduction of any evidence that hasn't been properly authenticated or disclosed during discovery." "Ms. Stone," Judge Williams replied without taking her eyes off Emma, "this is family court, and I have considerable discretion when it comes to hearing from the minor child. If Emma has something she wants to share, I'm going to listen." She turned back to my daughter. "Can you tell me what's on this recording, Emma?" Emma looked at me again, and I gave her the smallest nod I could manage. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure everyone in the courtroom could hear it. Whatever was on that iPad, whatever my little girl had captured, it was about to change everything. I just prayed it would change things in our favor. "Daddy was talking to me about living with him," Emma said quietly. "He was telling me what I should say today. But then he got really angry when I said I wanted to stay with Mommy and Nai. The courtroom seemed to contract around us. Michael's lawyer was furiously scribbling notes, probably calculating how to minimize whatever damage was coming. David looked like he was trying not to smile, while maintaining the appropriate gravity of the situation, and Michael himself had gone very still, like a predator that's just realized it's been cornered. "May I hear this recording, Emma?" Judge Williams asked. Emma nodded and held out the iPad toward the bailiff, Officer Martinez, who approached, carefully as if he were handling evidence in a murder trial. In many ways, he was. This recording would either murder Michael's chances of getting custody, or it would murder my hope of keeping my daughter safe. As Officer Martinez carried the iPad to Judge Williams' bench, I found myself thinking about all the paths that had led us to this moment. The years of marriage where I'd slowly lost myself, the night I'd finally found the courage to leave, the struggles of rebuilding our lives, and now this. My 6-year-old daughter, holding an iPad like David facing Goliath, ready to speak truth, in a room full of adults who were supposed to protect her but hadn't always succeeded. Judge Williams accepted the iPad and looked down at Emma with something that might have been respect. "Before I play this, Emma, I want you to know that you're very brave for sharing this with us. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." "Are you sure you want everyone to hear it?" Emma nodded solemnly. "Yes, ma'am. I want everyone to know what really happened." And with that simple statement, my daughter claimed her power in a way that I was still learning to do at 32. She was about to speak her truth, consequences be damned, and all I could do was sit there and pray that the adults in the room would listen. Judge Williams tapped the screen, and the courtroom filled with the sound of Emma's voice, younger and more carefree than the serious child sitting beside me. "This is Emma, and I'm at Daddy's house. and I'm practicing my words like Nai taught me." There was a pause, and then the sound of footsteps and Michael's voice, closer to the microphone than Emma's had been. What came next would either save us or destroy us, but at least it would be the truth. And sometimes, the truth is the only weapon you have left. The recording played on, and with each word that came through the speakers, I watched Michael's carefully constructed facade begin to crumble. My daughter had done what I'd been trying to do for 3 years. She'd captured the real Michael Rodriguez, not the charming real estate agent who sponsored little league teams and smiled for newspaper photos, but the man who lived behind closed doors, the man who threatened and manipulated and controlled. As the voices filled the courtroom, I realized that Emma hadn't just been recording herself practicing words that day. She'd been practicing courage. And now, in front of a room full of adults who held her future in their hands, she was showing us all what bravery looked like. It looked like a 6-year-old girl with an iPad, standing up to tell the truth when the grown-ups had failed to see it. It looked like my daughter, who was somehow stronger and wiser than I'd ever given her credit for, taking control of her own story in the only way she knew how. The recording continued to play, and I knew that no matter what happened next, Emma had already won. She'd found her voice, spoken her truth, and refused to let anyone else write her story for her. In that moment, sitting in that sterile courtroom with everything on the line, I was prouder of my daughter than I'd ever been of anything in my entire life. And I was about to learn that sometimes the most powerful voice in the room belongs to the smallest person in it. Michael Rodriguez had built his entire life around appearances. His downtown condo overlooked Cedar Falls' main strip with floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased his success to anyone driving by. His Mercedes was always spotless, parked in the premium spot outside Rodriguez Realty, where his name stretched across the storefront in gold lettering. He'd cultivated an image of the successful, single father, the devoted businessman who'd been wronged by an unstable ex-wife. The local newspaper had featured him just 2 months earlier in their Local Heroes section, highlighting his sponsorship of 3 different youth soccer teams and his volunteer work at the annual charity auction. The article mentioned his difficult divorce and his ongoing fight for his daughter, painting him as a man who put family first, despite personal hardships. What the article didn't mention was how he'd orchestrated the entire piece, calling in favors and making strategic donations to ensure the coverage painted him in the most favorable light possible. Rebecca Stone, his attorney, was known throughout Riverside County for her aggressive tactics and impressive win rate in family court. She commanded $1,500 per hour and had built her career on destroying opposing parties with surgical precision. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her sharp suit spoke of power and influence. She'd taken Michael's case not just for the substantial fee, but because she genuinely believed that successful, financially stable fathers were often discriminated against in custody proceedings. "Your Honor," Rebecca began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd won more cases than she'd lost. "My client has demonstrated unwavering commitment to his daughter's well-being. Mr. Rodriguez has maintained steady employment, owns his home outright, and has provided consistent financial support throughout this process. In contrast, Ms. Chen has struggled to maintain stable housing, working multiple part-time positions while relying heavily on her elderly mother for childcare." The words hit me like physical blows. Every struggle I'd endured while rebuilding our lives was being weaponized against me. The late nights working as a dental assistant, the tutoring sessions that kept food on our table, the small apartment that was cramped but filled with love, all of it was being twisted into evidence of my inadequacy as a mother. Michael nodded along with his lawyer's words, occasionally jotting notes on a yellow legal pad as if he were conducting business rather than fighting for custody of a human being. He'd changed since our marriage ended, becoming more polished and calculated. During our 8 years together, he'd been charming but volatile, prone to explosive anger when things didn't go his way. Now he'd learned to channel that intensity into a more sophisticated form of manipulation. Furthermore, Rebecca continued, Mr. Rodriguez has documented multiple instances where Emma has expressed dissatisfaction with her current living situation. The child has complained about the cramped apartment, the constant presence of her grandmother who speaks limited English, and her mother's frequent absences due to work obligations. My hands clenched in my lap as I listened to our life being dissected and distorted. Yes, our apartment was small. Yes, my mother Linda spoke primarily Mandarin, though Emma was perfectly bilingual and loved learning about her cultural heritage. And yes, I worked multiple jobs because Michael had left us financially devastated when he'd hidden assets during our divorce proceedings. David Park, my legal aid attorney, was scribbling furiously, preparing his counterarguments. At 28, he was passionate about family law, but inexperienced with the kind of sophisticated character assassination that Rebecca Stone specialized in. His earnestness was both his strength and his weakness in a case like this. Ms. Chen has repeatedly demonstrated concerning behavior, Rebecca pressed on, including what Mr. Rodriguez describes as emotional volatility and an inability to maintain appropriate boundaries when discussing adult matters in front of the child. There have been instances where Emma has arrived at her father's home visibly distressed after witnessing her mother's emotional outbursts. I wanted to scream that those emotional outbursts were me crying quietly in the bathroom after working 16-hour days, or the time Emma had caught me on the phone with the electric company trying to negotiate a payment plan. But in Rebecca's narrative, my humanity became evidence of my unsuitability as a parent. Michael leaned forward slightly, his expression perfectly crafted to show concerned paternal worry. He'd always been gifted at reading rooms and adjusting his performance accordingly. In business, it made him successful. In our marriage, it had made him dangerous. Your Honor, Rebecca continued, Emma has specifically told her father that she feels more secure in his home, that she enjoys having her own spacious bedroom and access to better educational resources. She's expressed anxiety about her mother's financial stress and has asked why they can't live in a nice house like her father's. Each word felt carefully chosen to paint Emma as a child, yearning for the stability that only Michael could provide. I wondered how much of what Rebecca claimed Emma had said was accurate, and how much had been shaped by Michael's particular talent for making people say what he wanted to hear. The financial disparity between us was stark and undeniable. Michael's real estate career had flourished in the years since our divorce, partly because he'd been able to focus entirely on work while I'd been responsible for Emma's day-to-day care. His condo was worth more than I'd make in 5 years, and he'd made sure everyone in the courtroom understood the implications of that difference. Additionally, Rebecca said, consulting her notes, Mr. Rodriguez has concerns about the influence of Ms. Chen's mother, who has been the primary caregiver while Ms. Chen works. While we respect Mrs. Chen's cultural background, there are legitimate questions about whether Emma is receiving appropriate guidance and supervision from someone who cannot effectively communicate with teachers, medical professionals, or other English-speaking adults in the child's life. The casual racism embedded in that statement made my stomach turn. My mother, Linda, had been an elementary school teacher in China before immigrating to the United States 30 years ago. Her English was perfectly functional for daily life, and Emma's bilingual abilities were a gift, not a hindrance. But Rebecca had found a way to make my mother's accent and cultural background sound like obstacles to Emma's development. Michael had coached Rebecca well on our family's vulnerabilities. He understood that a courtroom full of predominantly white professionals might find it easy to believe that a Chinese grandmother was somehow insufficient as a caregiver, despite the fact that Linda had been more consistently present in Emma's life than Michael had ever been. Mr. Rodriguez has also documented concerning changes in Emma's behavior following visits with her mother, Rebecca continued. The child returns from these visits withdrawn and anxious, often requiring several days to readjust to the stable routine in her father's home. I bit my tongue to keep from responding. Emma's withdrawn behavior after our visits was actually the normal sadness any child would feel when separated from their primary caregiver. But in Rebecca's narrative, even Emma's love for me became evidence of emotional manipulation. The systematic dismantling of my character and capabilities was thorough and professional. Rebecca had taken every aspect of our lives, my work schedule, our living situation, my mother's involvement, even Emma's natural emotional responses, and reframed them as evidence of my inadequacy. It was a masterclass in legal manipulation, and I could see from Judge Williams' expression that it was having the intended effect. Michael sat back in his chair, allowing his lawyer to do the heavy lifting while maintaining his facade of the concerned father who simply wanted what was best for his daughter. He'd learned to weaponize the legal system just as effectively as he'd once weaponized his charm and his temper. But what Rebecca and Michael hadn't anticipated was sitting right beside me, clutching an iPad that contained evidence they didn't even know existed. Emma had been quietly documenting her own truth, and their carefully constructed narrative was about to collide with reality in a way that none of us had expected. "Your Honor," Rebecca Stone continued, her voice gaining momentum as she built her case, "my client has prepared a detailed account of Emma's own words regarding her living preferences. These statements were made spontaneously during normal father-daughter activities without any prompting or coaching from Mr. Rodriguez." She pulled out a folder thick with documents, each page meticulously organized and tabbed. Michael had always been thorough when he wanted something, and apparently he'd been building this case for months. The folder contained what appeared to be a diary of sorts, documenting every interaction he'd had with Emma, every comment she'd made, every behavior he'd observed. On March 15th, Rebecca read from the documents, Emma told her father, and I quote, "Mommy cries a lot, and I don't know why. It makes me scared." On March 22nd, she said, "I wish we could live in a big house like Daddy's house. My bed is too small and I can hear Nai talking loud on the phone at night." Each quoted statement felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Some of them contained grains of truth. I had cried, though usually when I thought Emma couldn't see. Our apartment was small, and my mother did speak loudly on the phone sometimes, especially when talking to relatives in China. But Michael had taken these normal aspects of our life and twisted them into evidence of Emma's dissatisfaction. On April 3rd, Rebecca continued, Emma expressed concern about her mother's work schedule, stating, "Mommy is always tired and sometimes she forgets to make me lunch for school." She also mentioned feeling embarrassed when her grandmother picked her up from school because, quote, "The other kids ask why my grandma talks funny." I wanted to stand up and scream that Emma had never been embarrassed of her grandmother, that she was proud of being bilingual, and often translated for other children whose grandparents spoke different languages. The lunch incident had happened exactly once when I'd been working a double shift and had forgotten to pack her lunchbox. Michael had taken these isolated incidents and made them sound like patterns of neglect. "Most significantly," Rebecca said, her voice dropping to emphasize the importance of what she was about to reveal. On April 15th, just 3 weeks ago, Emma explicitly told her father that she wanted to live with him full-time. She said, and these are her exact words as documented by Mr. Rodriguez, "I love Mommy, but I want to live with Daddy because his house is nicer and he has more time to play with me." The courtroom was silent except for the soft scratching of the court reporter's fingers on her machine. Judge Williams leaned back in her chair, processing this information with the expression of someone who'd heard similar stories hundreds of times before. David Park was taking notes furiously, but I could see the concern in his eyes. This was exactly the kind of testimony that could sway a custody decision. Michael had positioned himself perfectly. By documenting Emma's statements over months, he'd created a paper trail that suggested a pattern of the child expressing preference for living with him. The fact that he'd been the one initiating many of these conversations asking leading questions and creating situations where Emma might express dissatisfaction with our living arrangements, wasn't apparent from the documentation. Your Honor, Rebecca continued, these statements weren't made during formal interviews or in response to direct questions about custody. They emerged naturally during everyday activities, while coloring, during car rides, over meals. Emma felt safe enough with her father to express her true feelings about her living situation. I knew Michael well enough to understand how he'd extracted these statements from Emma. He had a talent for asking questions that seemed innocent, but were designed to elicit specific responses. Don't you wish you had a bigger bedroom like the Saw? One at Daddy's house? Wouldn't it be nice if you didn't have to hear Nai talking so loud at night? Does Mommy seem sad to you lately? A 6-year-old child, eager to please her father and make conversation, would naturally agree with these suggestions. Michael had then documented her responses as if they were unprompted complaints about our living situation. It was manipulation, disguised as concerned parenting, and it was devastatingly effective. Furthermore, Rebecca said, pulling out another set of documents, Mr. Rodriguez has documented several instances where Emma has returned from visits with her mother displaying signs of emotional distress. On March 18th, Emma was withdrawn and refused to eat dinner after spending the weekend with Ms. Chen. On April 1st, she had a meltdown about returning to her mother's apartment, crying and saying she didn't want to go back to the sad house. The sad house comment cut deep because I remembered that exact conversation. Emma had been upset about leaving Michael's condo, not because she preferred living there, but because she knew it would be another week before she saw him again. She'd called our apartment the sad house because she was sad about the separation, not because she was unhappy living there. But Michael had documented only her words, not the context that explained them. These behavioral changes, Rebecca continued, are consistent with what child psychologists recognize as signs of anxiety and emotional instability in a child's primary living environment. Emma is clearly struggling with the current custody arrangement, and her own words indicate a strong preference for the stability and security that her father's home provides. Judge Williams was listening carefully, occasionally making notes on her legal pad. Family court judges dealt with heartbreaking situations every day, and they'd learned to look for patterns and evidence rather than being swayed by emotional appeals. Rebecca's presentation was compelling because it appeared to be based on Emma's own words and behaviors rather than adult interpretation. Michael maintained his expression of concerned worry throughout Rebecca's presentation, occasionally nodding, sadly as if her words pained him. He'd mastered the art of appearing reluctant to share information that portrayed me negatively, as if he were a devoted father forced to reveal uncomfortable truths for the sake of his daughter's well-being. Your Honor, Rebecca said, building toward her conclusion, Mr. Rodriguez doesn't make this request lightly. He recognizes the importance of a child's relationship with both parents, and he's prepared to facilitate generous visitation with Ms. Chen. However, Emma's own words and behaviors clearly indicate that she would be better served by making her father's stable, secure home her primary residence. The false narrative was complete and compelling. Michael had spent months building a case that painted me as a struggling single mother whose financial and emotional instability was negatively affecting our daughter. He'd documented Emma's words and behaviors in a way that supported his version of reality while conveniently omitting the context that would have revealed his manipulation. But what Rebecca and Michael didn't know was that Emma had been doing some documenting of her own. While they'd been carefully crafting their narrative, my 6-year-old daughter had accidentally captured a very different version of the truth. The iPad in her hands contained evidence that would expose the gap between Michael's public performance and his private behavior. Emma sat quietly beside me throughout Rebecca's presentation, her small hands still clutching her backpack. She listened to her own words being quoted and interpreted, hearing her father's lawyer explain what she'd meant and how she'd felt. I wondered what was going through her mind as she heard her private conversations with her father being shared with a room full of strangers. The false narrative was about to collide with authentic truth, and Emma was holding the evidence that would reveal which version of reality was actually real. Judge Williams removed her reading glasses and set them carefully on her desk. The gesture seemed to signal a shift in the proceedings, a movement from hearing arguments to making decisions. She looked first at Michael, then at me, and finally at Emma, who sat between us like a small bridge connecting two completely different versions of reality. "This is always the most difficult part of these proceedings," Judge Williams said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd made similar decisions countless times before. "We have two parents who clearly love their daughter, but who have very different perspectives on what's best for her future." The courtroom felt charged with anticipation. David Park was organized his notes, preparing for what would likely be his only opportunity to present our side of the story. Rebecca Stone sat back in her chair, with the confidence of someone who believed she'd already won. Michael maintained his posture of concerned fatherhood, while I tried to keep my hands from shaking. "However," Judge Williams continued, "in cases involving children, I always prefer to hear directly from the minor when age appropriate. Emma appears to be a bright, articulate child who's old enough to express her preferences and feelings about her living situation." She turned her attention fully to Emma, her expression softening in the way adults automatically adjust when addressing children. "Emma, I know this might feel scary, being in a big room with all these grown-ups talking about where you'll live. But I want you to know that everyone here cares about you and wants you to be happy and safe." Emma nodded solemnly, her grip tightening on her backpack. She'd been unusually quiet during the drive to the courthouse that morning, spending most of the time looking out the window and humming softly to herself. I'd assumed she was nervous about being in court, but now I wondered if she'd been preparing for this moment in ways I hadn't understood. "Sometimes," Judge Williams explained gently, "children your age have feelings about where they want to live, or things they want to tell the court about their families. There's no wrong answer, and you won't get in trouble for telling the truth about how you feel." I could feel Michael's tension from across the aisle, though his expression remained carefully neutral. He'd coached Emma for this moment, spent months planting seeds and documenting her responses. In his mind, this question was simply the final step in a process he'd been orchestrating since he'd filed for custody. "Now, Emma," Judge Williams said, leaning forward slightly, "your daddy's lawyer has told us that you've said you'd like to live with your father. She's shared some conversations where you talked about preferring his house and feeling more comfortable there. Is that accurate? Do you want to live with your daddy instead of with your mommy and Nai-Nai?" The question hung in the air like a sword suspended over all of our heads. This was the moment that would determine Emma's future, and by extension, the rest of my life. Everything we'd been through, all the struggles and rebuilding and late-night conversations about being brave and telling the truth, had led to this single question. Emma stood up slowly, her movement deliberate and measured. She was wearing the dress my mother had ironed the night before, navy blue with small white flowers, paired with her favorite shoes that lit up when she walked. Despite her serious expression, she still looked like what she was, a 6-year-old child who should be worried about playground games and picture books, not custody arrangements and courtroom testimony. Instead of answering immediately, Emma looked around the courtroom, taking in the faces of all the adults whose decisions would shape her future. She looked at Rebecca Stone, who was leaning forward expectantly. She looked at David Park, who was trying to hide his nervousness. She looked at Judge Williams, who waited patiently for her response. Then she looked at Michael, and for just a moment, something flickered across her face. It wasn't fear exactly, but a kind of knowing recognition, as if she were seeing him, clearly for the first time. She turned to look at me, and I gave her the smallest encouraging nod I could manage. "Your Honor," Emma said, her voice clear despite its softness, "may I show you something before I answer?" The request caught everyone off guard. Judge Williams raised her eyebrows slightly, while Rebecca Stone shifted uncomfortably in her chair. This wasn't part of the script that anyone had anticipated. "What would you like to show me, Emma?" Judge Williams asked. Emma reached into her backpack and pulled out the iPad mini, holding it carefully with both hands. "I have something I recorded," she said simply. "I think you should hear it before I answer your question." The change in the courtroom's atmosphere was immediate and electric. Michael's carefully maintained composure cracked just slightly. A flash of something, surprise, concern, maybe fear, crossing his face before he regained control. Rebecca Stone was already rising from her chair, preparing to object to whatever Emma was about to present. "Your Honor," Rebecca began, "we object to the introduction of any evidence that hasn't been properly authenticated or disclosed during discovery. We have no idea what's on this device or when it was recorded." But Judge Williams held up a hand, her attention focused entirely on Emma. "What kind of recording is it, sweetheart?" "It's from last weekend," Emma explained. "When I was at Daddy's house, I was practicing recording myself like Nai taught me, for when I want to tell stories or sing songs. But then Daddy came into my room and started talking to me about what I should say in court today." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, her hands suspended over her machine as if the entire proceeding had suddenly frozen in time. "I see," Judge Williams said carefully. "And you recorded this conversation?" Emma nodded. "I didn't mean to at first. The recording was already going when Daddy came in, but then he started saying things about Mommy and about what I should tell you, and I didn't know what to do. So I just let it keep recording." Michael's face had gone pale. His lawyer was whispering urgently in his ear, but his attention was fixed on the iPad in Emma's hands, as if it contained a bomb that was about to explode his carefully constructed world. "Emma," Judge Williams said gently, "this is very important. Did anyone tell you to make this recording? Did your mommy or Nai ask you to record your conversations with your daddy?" Emma shook her head firmly. "No, ma'am. Mommy doesn't even know about it. I just did it because—" She paused, struggling to find words for feelings that were probably too complex for her age. Because sometimes grown-ups don't believe kids when they tell the truth. "So I thought maybe if I had proof, then you would know what really happened." The wisdom in that statement hit me like a physical blow. My 6-year-old daughter had understood something about the adult world that I was still learning, that truth wasn't always enough, that sometimes you needed evidence to make people listen. She'd taken it upon herself to document her own experience because she'd somehow known that her word alone might not be sufficient. Judge Williams leaned back in her chair, clearly processing this unexpected development. "Before we proceed, Emma, I need you to understand that if I listen to this recording, everyone in this courtroom will hear it. Your daddy will hear it, his lawyer will hear it, and it might contain things that are difficult to talk about. Are you sure you want to share this?" Emma looked at me one more time, and I saw in her eyes a determination that reminded me of my own mother. The quiet strength of women who'd learned to speak truth even when it was dangerous to do so. "Yes, ma'am," Emma said firmly. "I want everyone to hear what really happened." Emma walked toward Judge Williams's bench with the steady gait of someone who'd made an irrevocable decision. Her light-up shoes blinked with each step, the only childlike element in a moment that had suddenly become profoundly adult. The iPad seemed enormous in her small hands, but she carried it like she understood its weight and importance. "Your Honor," Rebecca Stone said, rising quickly from her chair, "I must strongly object to this irregular procedure. The court cannot simply accept recordings from a minor child without proper authentication, chain of custody documentation, or verification of when and how this alleged recording was made." Judge Williams looked at Rebecca with the patience of someone who dealt with aggressive attorneys for decades. "Ms. Stone, this is family court, not criminal court. My primary concern is the best interests of the child, and if Emma has something, that she believes is relevant to her own custody determination. I'm going to hear it." David Park was scribbling notes frantically, trying to keep up with this unexpected turn of events. As a legal aid attorney, he'd probably never seen a case where a 6-year-old had independently gathered evidence. He looked like he wasn't sure whether to be thrilled or terrified by this development. Michael had gone very still in his chair. His hands were flat on the table in front of him, and I could see the tension in his shoulders despite his attempt to maintain composure. The man who'd built his career on controlling narratives and managing perceptions was suddenly faced with evidence he couldn't spin or explain away. "Emma," Judge Williams said gently, "before I listen to this recording, I want to make sure you understand what we're doing. Sometimes when we record people, they might say things they didn't mean, or they might have been having a bad day. People aren't always at their best every moment. Do you understand that?" Emma nodded seriously. "Yes, ma'am. But this wasn't Daddy having a bad day. This was Daddy telling me what to say to you so that I would have to live with him even if I didn't want to." The simplicity and clarity of her statement cut through all the legal maneuvering and courtroom protocol. Here was a child who understood exactly what had happened to her and exactly why it mattered. She wasn't confused or manipulated or uncertain. She was a person who'd experienced something important and was determined to share that truth. "I see," Judge Williams said. "And Emma, has anyone coached you about what to say regarding this recording? Has anyone helped you decide to share it? Today?" "No, ma'am," Emma replied. "I decided by myself. Last night I was thinking about today, and I was scared because Daddy told me I had to say things that weren't true. But then I remembered that Nai always says that telling the truth is the most important thing, even when it's scary." My mother's influence was evident in Emma's words. Linda had spent countless hours teaching Emma about honesty and courage, often through stories from Chinese folklore about brave characters who chose to do right, even when it was difficult. Those bedtime stories were paying dividends in ways my mother could never have anticipated. "Your Honor," Rebecca interjected again, "even if we allow this recording to be heard, we need to consider the source. This is a 6-year-old child who may have misunderstood conversations or taken statements out of context. Children often misinterpret adult communications, especially during emotionally charged situations." Emma turned to look at Rebecca with an expression that was remarkable for its composure. "I didn't misunderstand," she said quietly. "Daddy was very clear about what he wanted me to say. He practiced with me." The phrase, "he practiced with me," sent a chill through the courtroom. Even Rebecca seemed momentarily taken aback by the matter-of-fact way Emma had delivered that information. Judge Williams leaned forward, her professional detachment giving way to something more personal. "Emma, when you say your daddy practiced with you, what do you mean exactly?" "He told me what words to say to you," Emma explained. "He said I should tell you that I wanted to live with him because Mommy's house was too small and Nai was too loud and Mommy cried too much. He made me say it back to him until I got it right." Michael's lawyer was whispering urgently in his ear, but he wasn't responding. His face had taken on a grayish pallor, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked genuinely frightened. The man who'd always been able to talk his way out of any situation was facing the possibility that his own words, recorded by his own daughter, were about to destroy his carefully crafted case. "And Emma," Judge Williams continued, "is that recording on the iPad you're holding?" Emma nodded. "Yes, ma'am. It's all there. Everything Daddy said to me, and everything he wanted me to say to you." Officer Martinez approached Emma and gently took the iPad from her hands. The device looked small and innocuous, like any tablet a child might use for games or educational apps. But everyone in the courtroom understood that it contained evidence that could fundamentally alter the trajectory of this case. "Before we proceed," Judge Williams said, "I want to ensure that everyone understands the gravity of what we're about to hear. If this recording contains evidence of coaching or manipulation of a minor child in preparation for custody proceedings, it will have serious implications for this case and potentially for any future custody arrangements. She looked directly at Michael, who was staring at the iPad as if it were a snake coiled to strike. "Mr. Rodriguez, do you have any statement you'd like to make before I play this recording?" Michael looked at his lawyer, who shook her head, almost imperceptibly. Speaking now would only make things worse, whatever was on that recording. Rebecca had clearly calculated that their best strategy was to listen first and then attempt damage control. "No, Your Honor," Michael said, his voice hoarse. "I have no statement at this time. Judge Williams accepted the iPad from Officer C. Martinez and examined it briefly. Emma, can you show me how to play the recording you want me to hear?" Emma approached the bench again, her movements confident despite the magnitude of what she was doing. She tapped the screen several times, navigating to the voice recording app with the familiarity of a child who'd grown up with technology. Within moments, the screen showed a recording from the previous weekend, nearly 20 minutes long. "This is the one," Emma said, pointing to the file. "It starts with me practicing, but then Daddy comes in and starts talking about court." Judge Williams positioned the iPad so that the speakers would project clearly throughout the courtroom. The silence was absolute as she prepared to press play. Even the ambient sounds from outside seemed muted, as if the entire building was holding its breath. "Are you ready, Emma?" Judge Williams asked. Emma returned to her seat beside me, climbing onto the bench with practiced ease. She reached for my hand and squeezed it gently, a gesture of comfort that could have been meant for either of us. Her small act of affection gave me strength even as my heart pounded with anticipation and terror about what we were about to hear. "I'm ready," Emma said simply. Judge Williams pressed play, and Emma's voice filled the courtroom, young and cheerful, and completely unaware of what was about to unfold. "This is Emma Chen, and I'm practicing my reading like Nai taught me. Today is Saturday, and I'm at Daddy's house, and we had pancakes for breakfast." The innocence in her recorded voice was heartbreaking. She'd been having a normal weekend morning, practicing skills her grandmother had taught her, completely unaware that she was about to capture evidence that would change all of our lives. The recording continued with Emma reading aloud from what sounded like a children's book, her voice careful and deliberate as she worked through challenging words. Then, clearly audible through the iPad speakers, came the sound of footsteps and a door opening. "Emma, what are you doing?" came Michael's voice, closer to the microphone than Emma's had been. "I'm practicing reading, Daddy, like Nai taught me. And I'm recording myself so I can hear if I'm doing it right." "That's nice, sweetheart, but I need to talk to you about something important. About Monday when we go to see the judge." The temperature in the courtroom seemed to drop several degrees. Michael's voice on the recording was different from his courtroom demeanor. More casual, more controlling, and completely unaware that his words were being preserved for posterity. What came next would either vindicate everything I'd been trying to tell people about Michael for years, or it would destroy any credibility I had left. Either way, the truth was about to speak for itself through the clear, unfiltered voices of a father and daughter who'd thought they were having a private conversation. The recording played on, and with each word that emerged from the speakers, the carefully constructed narrative that Rebecca Stone had presented began to crumble. Emma sat beside me, listening to her own voice and her father's, waiting for the adults in the room to hear what she'd been carrying alone for days. In that moment, my 6-year-old daughter had done something I'd been unable to do for years. She'd captured the real Michael Rodriguez, not the public version he presented to the world, but the man who existed behind closed doors when he thought no one was listening. The truth was about to set us free, one recorded word at a time. The recording continued to play, Emma's innocent voice narrating her Saturday morning activities with the unconscious authenticity that only children possess. She described the pancakes Michael had made, how she'd helped mix the batter, and how she was excited to practice her reading skills like her grandmother had taught her. The normalcy of it all made what was coming feel even more ominous. "That's wonderful, Emma," came Michael's voice through the speakers, warm and paternal in a way that reminded me painfully of the early days of our relationship. "You're getting so good at reading. Nai has taught you well." I could hear him moving around in the background, probably sitting down on Emma's bed or in the chair by her window. The casual intimacy of a father visiting his daughter in her room made the manipulation that was about to unfold even more disturbing. "Daddy," Emma's recorded voice said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart. You can ask me anything." "Why do Mommy and Nai look sad when I come back? From your house? Did I do something wrong?" The question hit me like a punch to the chest. Emma had noticed our emotional responses to her returns from Michael's visits, and she'd internalized them as somehow being her fault. The guilt I felt for not hiding. My feelings better was overwhelming, but more than that, I was struck by her perceptive awareness of the adults around her. "Oh, honey," Michael's voice said with practiced sympathy, "you didn't do anything wrong. Mommy and Nai are just, well, they're having a hard time right now. Sometimes grown-ups get sad about things that aren't your fault." There was a pause in the recording, filled with the ambient sounds of his condo. Traffic from the street below, the hum of expensive appliances, the distant sound of his neighbor's television. Then Michael's voice resumed, but with a subtle shift in tone that made my skin crawl. "Emma, you know how we talked about Monday? About going to see the judge?" "Yes, Daddy." "Well, the judge is going to ask you some questions about where you want to live. And it's very important that you tell her the truth about how you feel." Judge Williams was listening intently, her expression carefully neutral, but her body language suggesting complete attention. Rebecca Stone had stopped, taking notes, and was sitting rigidly in her chair, probably calculating the damage that each word was inflicting on their case. "But Daddy," came Emma's small voice, "I already told you the truth. I want to live with Mommy and Nai. I like coming to visit you, but I want to go home with them." The silence that followed was brief but telling. I could almost see Michael's face as he processed Emma's response, recalibrating his approach in real time. He'd always been skilled at adjusting his tactics when his initial strategy didn't produce the desired results. "I know that's what you think you want, sweetheart," Michael said, his voice taking on a tone of patient explanation. "But sometimes what we think we want isn't what's actually best for us. You're still very young, and there are things about your living situation that you might not fully understand." Emma's confusion was audible in her response. "What things, Daddy?" "Well, for instance, you've told me that your apartment is very small, right? And that you have to share a room." "With Mommy?" "Yes, but I like sharing with Mommy. We read stories together before bed, and she sings to me when I have bad dreams." Michael pressed on, undeterred by Emma's positive associations with our shared space. "But wouldn't you like to have your own big room, like you do here at my house? With your own princess bed and all your toys spread out however you want them?" "I guess that would be nice," Emma admitted, with the honesty of a child who couldn't see the trap being laid for her. "And you've mentioned that Nai talks very loudly on the phone, especially at night when you're trying to sleep. That must be frustrating for you." "Sometimes," Emma agreed, "but she's talking to family in China. Mommy explained that it's daytime there when it's nighttime here, so that's when they can talk." Michael's voice carried a note of gentle persistence. "I understand that, honey, but that doesn't make it less disruptive for you. Children need quiet, peaceful environments to sleep and grow properly. Don't you think you sleep better here at my house?" The manipulation was so subtle and skillful that I found myself almost admiring its craftsmanship, even as it horrified me. Michael was taking Emma's natural, childlike preferences and innocent observations, then slowly reshaping them into complaints against our living situation. "I sleep okay at home," Emma said, but there was less certainty in her voice now. Of course you do, sweetheart. You're a very adaptable little girl. But think about how much better you sleep here, in your own quiet room with the blackout curtains and the soft mattress. Don't you wake up feeling more rested here? Emma was quiet for a moment, probably considering his words with the seriousness that children bring to adult conversations they don't fully understand. Maybe, she said finally. And what about Mommy's work schedule? Michael continued. You've told me that she's always tired, that sometimes she falls asleep on the couch while you're playing. That must make you feel lonely sometimes. Mommy works really hard, Emma said with a loyalty that made my heart ache. She has 2 jobs so we can pay for our apartment and my school clothes and food. I know she works hard, honey, but working. That hard means she doesn't have as much energy to spend time with you, right? When you're here with me, I can focus all my attention on you. We can go to the park or the zoo or wherever you want to go. The contrast he was drawing was devastatingly effective precisely because it contained elements of truth. I did work, long hours, and I was often exhausted. Michael did have more disposable income and flexible schedule that allowed him to take Emma on elaborate outings. But he was framing these differences as evidence of neglect rather than the natural result of his leaving us financially vulnerable. I like going places with you, Daddy, Emma said, but I also like staying home with Mommy and Nai. We cook together and Nai teaches me Chinese words and Mommy helps me with my homework. Michael's patience was beginning to fray slightly, audible in the tighter quality of his voice. Those are nice activities, sweetheart, but they're not the same as having dedicated quality time with a parent who isn't stressed about money or exhausted from working multiple jobs. Emma didn't respond immediately, and I could picture her processing this information with the confusion of a child who loved all the adults in her life, but was being asked to choose between them. Emma, Michael continued, his voice becoming more directive, when the judge asks you on Monday where you want to live, what are you going to tell her? I'm going to tell her I want to live with Mommy, Emma said with the simple certainty of a child stating an obvious fact. The pause that followed was longer this time, and I could sense Michael's frustration building. He'd been laying groundwork for months, documenting Emma's statements, building a case around her supposed dissatisfaction with our living arrangement. But faced with a direct question, she was still choosing us. Emma, Michael said, his voice taking on a new quality that was both gentle and somehow threatening. I need you to really think about this. The judge is going to make a decision based on what she thinks is best for you. If you tell her you want to stay with Mommy, she might think that's what you want, but it might not be what's actually best for your future. I don't understand. Daddy. Well, honey, judges are very smart, and they look at things like which parent can provide the best home, the best opportunities, the best life for a child. When she sees that I have a big house and a good job and more time to spend with you, she might decide that you should live with me even if that's not what you say you want. The manipulation had taken a sinister turn. Michael was essentially telling Emma that her own preferences might not matter, that the decision would be made based on factors beyond her control. But more than that, he was setting up a scenario where she might feel responsible for the outcome. But what if I really want to stay with Mommy? Emma asked, and I could hear the beginning of distress in her voice. Then you need to think very carefully about whether that's really what's best for you, Michael replied. Sometimes children think they want things that aren't good for them. Sometimes they need adults to make better decisions for them. Emma was quiet for a long moment, and I could almost see her trying to puzzle out the implications of what her father was telling her. At 6 years old, she was being asked to navigate concepts that would challenge adults. The difference between what she wanted and what others might think was best for her, the possibility that her own feelings might be dismissed or overruled. Daddy, she said finally, are you saying I should tell the judge I want to live with you even if I don't? The directness of the question seemed to catch Michael off guard. I could hear him shifting position, probably leaning closer to her, or taking her hands in his. I'm saying, sweetheart, that you should think very carefully about what kind of life you want to have. Do you want to keep living in a tiny apartment where you can't sleep peacefully? Do you want to keep watching mommy cry because she's stressed about money? Do you want to keep feeling sad every time you have to leave my nice house and go back to that situation? He was reframing every aspect of our life together as a problem to be solved, painting himself as the solution to difficulties that he had largely created through his financial manipulation during our divorce. "But I don't feel sad going home," Emma protested. "I feel sad leaving you, but I'm happy to see Mommy and Nine-Eye." "Are you, honey? Are you really happy there? Or do you just think you should be happy there because that's what Mommy wants you to feel?" The question was designed to make Emma doubt her own emotions and perceptions. Michael was essentially gaslighting a 6-year-old, making her question whether her feelings were authentic or somehow programmed by me. Emma was quiet, again, and when she spoke, her voice was smaller and more uncertain than it had been at the beginning of the recording. "I don't know anymore, Daddy. I'm confused." "I know you are, sweetheart. And that's okay. That's why adults have to help children make these big decisions. The judge is going to ask you what you want, but what she really needs to hear is what would be best for your future." Michael had successfully taken a confident child who knew her own mind and turned her into a confused little girl who doubted her own feelings. The transformation was audible in the recording, and it was heartbreaking to witness. But Emma was about to surprise everyone in that courtroom, including me. Because even at 6 years old, she possessed something that Michael had never understood and could never manipulate: an innate sense of truth and the courage to speak it when it mattered most. The recording continued, but Judge Williams paused it temporarily to address the courtroom. The weight of what we'd just heard seemed to settle over everyone like a heavy blanket. Even the court reporter had stopped typing and was staring at the iPad with an expression of dismay. "Before we continue," Judge Williams said, "I want to make sure everyone understands what we've just heard. Mr. Rodriguez, this recording appears to document you coaching your daughter on what to tell this court regarding her custody preferences. Do you have any immediate response to these statements?" Michael's face had gone from pale to ashen. His lawyer, Rebecca, was whispering urgently in his ear, but he seemed to be in a state of shock. The man who'd built his career on smooth talking and persuasive presentations was suddenly speechless. "Your Honor," Rebecca said, standing quickly, "my client needs a moment to consult with counsel before making any statements regarding this recording. Ms. Stone, we're going to hear the rest of this recording first. Then your client will have an opportunity to respond." Judge Williams turned back to the iPad. "Emma, how much more of this conversation is recorded?" Emma, who had been sitting quietly beside me throughout the playback, looked up at the judge. "There's more, Your Honor. The important part is coming." I squeezed Emma's hand gently, amazed by her composure. She was handling this situation with more grace and courage than most adults would have managed. My 6-year-old daughter was teaching a courtroom full of legal professionals what integrity looked like. Judge Williams resumed the recording, and Emma's confused voice filled the courtroom again. "I don't know anymore, Daddy. I'm confused." "I know you are, sweetheart," came Michael's voice, warmer now that he seemed to have achieved his goal of undermining Emma's certainty. "And that's okay. That's why adults have to help children make these big decisions." There was a sound on the recording that suggested movement, probably Michael getting up from wherever he'd been sitting. His voice became slightly more distant, but still clearly audible. "Now, Emma, let's practice what you're going to say to the judge on Monday. When she asks where you want to live, what are you going to tell her?" "I don't know, Daddy. I'm still confused." "That's all right. Let me help you think through it. You're going to tell her that you love both Mommy and me, but that you think you would be happier living with me. Can you say that?" There was a long pause before Emma's small voice responded. "But Daddy, that's not true. I wouldn't be happier living with you all the time." Michael's voice took on a note of strained patience. "Emma, we just talked about this. Sometimes what we think we want isn't what's actually best for us. You need to think about your future, about having your own room and not having to worry about Mommy being sad all the time. But if I live with you, then Mommy will be even sadder, Emma pointed out with the logical clarity that children sometimes possess. And I'll be sad too because I won't see her every day. Honey, you'll still see Mommy. She can visit you here, or you can go visit her sometimes. But this way, you'll have a better life. And eventually Mommy will understand that this was the right decision. Emma was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a different quality. Not confusion, but a kind of dawning understanding. Daddy? Are you trying to take me away from Mommy? The question hung in the air, spoken with the devastating directness that only children can achieve. Michael's response was immediate and telling. No, sweetheart. I'm trying to give you a better life. There's a difference. But if I live with you all the time, and I only visit Mommy sometimes, then you did take me away from her. Michael's voice became more urgent, and I could hear the frustration he was trying to control. Emma, you're too young to understand all the complicated things that go into these decisions. Adults have to look at factors like financial stability, living conditions, and what kind of opportunities each parent can provide. I understand more than you think, Daddy. The simple statement carried such dignity and wisdom that it stopped Michael's speech entirely. For several seconds, the only sound on the recording was the ambient noise from his condo. What do you mean, honey? He asked finally. I mean, I understand that you want me to lie to the judge so that I'll have to live with you even though I don't want to. The accusation was so direct and uncompromising that it seemed to suck all the air out of the courtroom. Michael's recorded voice became sharp with barely controlled anger. Emma, that's not what we're doing. We're helping you understand what would be best for your future. No, Daddy. You're asking me to say things that aren't true. Nai says that lying is wrong, even when someone tells you it's okay. This isn't lying, Emma. This is thinking about your life in a more mature way. It is lying, Emma insisted with the stubborn certainty of a child who'd been taught clear moral principles. You want me to tell the judge I want to live with you when I really want to live with Mommy? That's lying. Michael's voice when he responded carried an edge that made my blood run cold. It was the tone I remembered from our worst fights, the sound of his control slipping and his real nature beginning to show through. Emma, you need to listen to me very carefully. On Monday, when that judge asks you where you want to live, you're going to tell her that you want to live with me. You're going to tell her that Mommy's apartment is too small and too noisy, and that you feel more comfortable in my house. But that's not true, Daddy. It doesn't matter if you think it's true or not. What matters is what's going to happen if you don't say those things. The threat was implicit but unmistakable. Emma's voice became very small when she responded. What's going to happen? Michael's answer chilled me to the bone, even though I was hearing it for the second time through the recording. If you tell the judge you want to stay with Mommy, then I'm going to have to tell her some things about your mother that might make her very sad. Things about how Mommy can't really take care of you properly, and how living with her might not be safe for you. What things, Daddy? Mommy takes good care of me. Does she, Emma? Does she really? When she falls asleep on the couch because she's too tired to put you to bed properly? When she cries in the bathroom because she can't pay the bills? When she makes you worry about grown-up problems that children shouldn't have to think about? Each accusation was like a knife twisting in my chest. Michael was taking my moments of human weakness, the times when I'd struggled with the overwhelming responsibility of single parenthood, and weaponizing them against both Emma and me. Mommy works hard to take care of us, Emma said, her voice strong despite the pressure she was under. And when she's sad, I help her feel better. That's what families do. That's not what children should have to do, Emma. Children should be protected from their parents' problems, not asked to solve them. I don't solve Mommy's problems. I just give her hugs when she's sad. Michael's voice became even more threatening. Emma, if you don't tell the judge what I'm asking you to tell her, then I'm going to have to explain to her why Mommy isn't fit to take care of you. And that's going to make Mommy very, very sad. Much sadder than she's ever been before. The recording captured Emma's sharp intake of breath, the sound of a child realizing that the adult she trusted was threatening someone she loved. You would hurt Mommy's feelings on purpose? She asked, and the pain in her voice was heartbreaking. I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, sweetheart, but I have to protect you, even if that means saying things that make Mommy sad. Unless, of course, you tell the judge that you want to live with me, then I won't have to say those things at all. The manipulation was complete and devastating. Michael had presented Emma with an impossible choice: lie about her preferences or be responsible for causing me pain. He'd taken a 6-year-old child and made her feel responsible for protecting her mother from his threats. I don't want you to hurt Mommy, Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. Then you know what you need to do on Monday. There was a long pause in the recording, filled only with the sound of Emma's quiet breathing. When she spoke again, her voice was different, not defeated, but thoughtful in a way that suggested she was processing information beyond her years. Daddy, if I tell the judge I want to live with you, and then I have to live with you all the time, will you be nice to me? The question seemed to catch Michael off guard. Of course I'll be nice to you, Emma. You're my daughter. Will you be nice like you are when I visit, or nice like you were to Mommy when we all lived together? The silence that followed was profound and telling. Emma had somehow understood that Michael's behavior during her weekend visits might not represent his full-time parenting style, and she was asking him to confront that reality. I don't know what you mean, honey, Michael said finally. Mommy told me that you used to yell at her a lot when I was little. Will you yell at me if I live with you and I do something wrong? Michael's voice became tight with barely controlled anger. Emma, you shouldn't listen to things Mommy says about me. She's still upset about the divorce, and sometimes she says things that aren't true. So you didn't yell at Mommy? All parents have disagreements sometimes. That doesn't mean anyone was being mean. Emma was quiet for another moment, and I could almost see her 6-year-old mind working through the implications of everything she'd heard. When she spoke again, her voice carried a resolve that surprised everyone who heard it. Daddy, I'm not going to lie to the judge. The recording continued with Michael's response to Emma's declaration, and his voice carried a coldness that I recognized but hoped Emma would never have to experience. Emma, you're being very stubborn about this, and that's not acceptable. When adults tell you what's best for you, you need to listen. Nah, but Mommy says I should always tell the truth, and Nai says lying makes the ancestors sad. Emma's invocation of our family's values seemed to infuriate Michael further. Throughout our marriage, he'd resented my mother's influence and the cultural connections that Emma was developing. He'd often complained that Linda was filling Emma's head with foreign nonsense when she taught her about Chinese traditions or spoke to her in Mandarin. Your Nai fills your head with a lot of old-fashioned ideas, Emma. In the real world, sometimes people have to be practical about what they say and do. Being practical doesn't mean lying, Daddy. Michael's voice became sharper, losing the patient facade he'd been maintaining. Emma, you're 6 years old. You don't understand how the world works, and you don't understand what's at stake here. I understand that you want me to say something that isn't true. What I want is for you to have the best possible life. What I want is for you to live in a nice house with your own room and good schools and opportunities that your mother can't give you. Emma's response was quiet but firm. I already have the best possible life, Daddy. I have Mommy and Nai and you, and I don't want that to change. The simplicity of her statement seemed to enrage Michael. I could hear him moving around the room, probably pacing as he did when he was frustrated and trying to maintain control. Emma, listen to me very carefully. Your mother doesn't have enough money to take care of you properly. She works all the time because she has to, which means she can't spend time with you. You live in a tiny apartment that's not suitable for a growing child. These aren't opinions, they're facts. Those things don't make me unhappy, Daddy. They should make you unhappy. Children deserve better than what your mother can provide. Emma was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a maturity that was heartbreaking in someone so young. Daddy, why did you and Mommy stop living together? The question seemed to stop Michael in his tracks. The recording captured several seconds of silence before he responded. Sometimes adults realize they're not right for each other, sweetheart. It doesn't mean anyone did anything wrong. But did someone do something wrong? Michael's voice became evasive. These are complicated adult things, Emma. You don't need to worry about what happened between Mommy and me. Mommy told me that you hurt her feelings a lot, and that's why she had to take me away so we could both be safe. The recording captured Michael's sharp intake of breath. I'd always been careful about how I discussed our divorce with Emma, but I'd also been honest about the basic facts in age-appropriate ways. Apparently, Emma had been processing those conversations more deeply than I'd realized. Your mother has her own version of what happened, Michael said carefully, but there are always two sides to every story. What's your side, Daddy? My side is that I loved your mother very much, and I love you very much, and I wanted us to be a family. But your mother decided that wasn't what she wanted. The lie was so smooth and practiced that it almost sounded believable even to me. Michael had always been skilled at rewriting history to make himself the victim of other people's unreasonable decisions. But Daddy, if you loved us, why did you make Mommy cry so much? The question hit its target with devastating accuracy. I could hear Michael's breathing change as he struggled to maintain his composure. I never meant to make Mommy cry, Emma. Sometimes when people love each other very much, they have disagreements that get emotional. Did you yell at Mommy because you loved her? Emma, you're asking about things that are too complicated for you to understand. I understand yelling, Emma said, with the simple clarity of a child who'd witnessed more than she should have. When people yell, it means they're angry. When they yell a lot, it means they're angry a lot. Michael's voice became defensive. All couples argue sometimes, Emma. That's normal. Nai told me that her and Grandpa never yelled at each other, not even when they disagreed about things. Well, that's very nice for them, but every relationship is different. Emma was quiet again, and I could almost see her processing the contrast between the relationship model my parents had provided and what she'd witnessed between Michael and me. Daddy, when I live with you all the time, will you yell at me? When you're angry? The question was devastating in its innocence and insight. Emma was trying to predict her future based on Michael's past behavior, and she was smart enough to recognize that his weekend visit persona might not represent his full-time parenting style. Emma, I would never yell at you. You're my daughter, and I love you. But you yelled at Mommy, and you said you loved her too. Michael's response carried a sharp edge of frustration. That was completely different, Emma. The relationship between a parent and child is not the same as the relationship between a husband and wife. How is it different? It just is. You're going to have to trust me on that. Emma's voice became very small. I'm scared, Daddy. Scared of what, sweetheart? I'm scared that if I live with you all the time, you'll get angry at me like you got angry at Mommy. Michael's response was immediate and sharp. Emma, you need to stop saying things like that. I have never hurt you, and I would never hurt you. You're hurting me right now, Emma said quietly. You're asking me to lie, and you're saying mean things about Mommy, and you're making me scared about what will happen if I tell the truth. The accuracy of her assessment seemed to stun Michael into silence. For several seconds, the only sound on the recording was Emma's quiet breathing. "I'm not trying to hurt you," Michael said finally, his voice softer but still carrying an undertone of threat. "I'm trying to help you understand what's at stake here." "What's at stake, Daddy?" "Your future, Emma. Your entire future depends on what you say to that judge on Monday." "My future depends on telling the truth, doesn't Daddy?" The wisdom in that simple question seemed to deflate Michael's arguments entirely. Emma had cut through all his manipulation and pressure to identify the core moral issue at stake. Sometimes, Emma, the truth isn't enough. Sometimes people need to hear things presented in a certain way to understand what's really best. "That's not truth, Daddy. That's just saying what you want people to hear." Michael's voice became cold in a way that made me grip the edge of my chair. "Emma, you're being very difficult about this, and I'm starting to lose my patience." "I'm not being difficult. I'm trying to be good." "Being good means listening to your father and doing what I'm asking you to do." "No, Daddy. Being good means telling the truth and not hurting people on purpose." The moral clarity of Emma's statement seemed to enrage Michael beyond his ability to control. When he spoke again, his voice carried the threatening tone that I remembered from our worst fights. "Emma, if you don't do what I'm asking you to do on Monday, there are going to be consequences, not just for you, but for your mother. Do you understand me?" Emma's voice became very quiet. "Yes, Daddy, I understand." "Good. Now let's practice one more time. When the judge asks where you want to live, what are you going to say?" There was a long pause, and when Emma spoke again, her voice carried a determination that would have made me proud if I hadn't been so terrified for her. "I'm going to tell her the truth, Daddy. I'm going to tell her that I want to live with Mommy and Nai, and that you tried to make me lie." The silence that followed was profound and terrifying. When Michael finally spoke, his voice carried a rage that I'd only heard a few times during our marriage, always directed at me, never at Emma until now. "You're making a very big mistake, Emma. A mistake that you're going to regret for the rest of your life." The recording continued with Emma's response to Michael's threat, and her voice carried a steadiness that was remarkable for someone so young. "I won't regret telling the truth, Daddy." Michael's breathing was audible through the iPad's speakers, the sound of someone struggling to control their temper. When he spoke again, his voice carried a different quality, not the practiced patience he'd been using, but something rawer and more honest. "Emma, you have no idea what you're doing. You have no idea what your life will be like if you stay with your mother." "My life is good with Mommy, Daddy. Your life is small with your mother, cramped and worried and full of stress about money, and problems that children shouldn't have to think about." Emma was quiet for a moment, and when she responded, her voice carried a wisdom that seemed far beyond her years. "Maybe our apartment is small, but it's full of love. Maybe Mommy gets tired, but she always takes care of me. Maybe we don't have a lot of money, but we have everything we need." The simple eloquence of her response seemed to frustrate Michael further. He'd been trying to make her see our life through his lens of inadequacy and limitation, but Emma had her own perspective that he couldn't shake. "You're too young to understand what you're giving up," he said. "I'm not giving up anything. Daddy, I'm choosing what makes me happy." Happiness isn't enough, Emma. Security matters. Opportunities matter. Your future matters more than your feelings right now. "My feelings matter to me," Emma said firmly, "and they matter to Mommy and Nai." Michael's voice became sharp with exasperation. "Your feelings are those of a 6-year-old child. They're not based on understanding what's actually best for your life." "I understand love, Daddy. I understand feeling safe. I understand being happy. Those are the most important things." The moral clarity of Emma's statement seemed to strip away Michael's remaining pretenses. When he spoke again, his voice carried the cold calculation that I remembered from our worst confrontations. "Emma, let me explain something to you. If you tell that judge on Monday that you want to stay with your mother, I'm going to tell her that your mother is unstable. I'm going to tell her that your mother can't provide for you properly. I'm going to tell her that living with your mother puts you at risk." Emma's sharp intake of breath was audible through the speakers. "But those things aren't true, Daddy." "Truth is relative, sweetheart. What matters is what I can prove and what the judge will believe." The casual cruelty of that statement sent a chill through the courtroom. Michael was essentially admitting that he was willing to destroy my reputation and credibility with lies in order to get what he wanted. "You would lie about Mommy?" Emma asked, and the hurt in her voice was heartbreaking. "I would do whatever it takes to protect your future, even if it means saying things that make people sad in the short term." Emma was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a different quality. Not fear, but a kind of dawning understanding. "Daddy, why do you want me to live with you so much?" The question seemed to catch Michael off guard. "Because I love you, Emma. Because I want what's best for you." "But if you love me, why are you trying to scare me? Why are you saying you'll hurt Mommy if I don't do what you want?" Michael's response was immediate and defensive. "I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to help you understand the consequences of your choices. Threatening to hurt someone I love is scary, Daddy." The simple truth of that statement seemed to silence Michael entirely. For several seconds, the only sound on the recording was the ambient noise from his condo. "I don't want to hurt anyone," he said finally, "but I won't let your mother's problems prevent you from having the life you deserve." "What problems, Daddy?" "Her money problems, her work problems, her inability to provide you with the kind of stability and opportunities that I can give you." Emma's voice became thoughtful. "Are those problems, or are those just things that are different from your life?" The perceptiveness of the question seemed to frustrate Michael beyond measure. "They're problems, Emma." The recording reached its most devastating moment as Michael's voice became increasingly desperate and threatening. Emma's quiet resistance had clearly pushed him beyond his carefully maintained facade. And what emerged was the man I had lived with behind closed doors for 8 years. "They're problems, Emma. Real problems that affect your daily life and your future prospects," Michael continued, his voice tight with barely controlled frustration. "When you live in a cramped apartment, when your mother is constantly stressed about money, when you have to tiptoe around because your grandmother is on the phone with China at all hours, those things impact your development and your happiness." Emma's response came after a thoughtful pause, her 6-year-old voice carrying an emotional intelligence that seemed to surprise even her father. "Daddy, I think you're confusing being different with being wrong. Our apartment isn't big, but it's cozy. Mommy worries about money sometimes, but she always makes sure I have what I need. And when Nai talks to family in China, I like listening even when I don't understand all the words." The clarity of her perspective seemed to infuriate Michael further. Throughout our marriage, he'd always become most dangerous when his attempts at control were met with rational resistance. I could hear that familiar edge creeping into his voice, the sound that had once made me hide in bathrooms and send Emma to her room. "Emma, you're romanticizing a situation that isn't healthy for a child. You deserve stability, not constant worry about whether there's enough money for groceries. You deserve space, not sharing a bedroom with your mother because she can't afford a proper 2-bedroom apartment. You deserve quiet, not listening to foreign conversations that you can't even understand." The casual racism embedded in his dismissal of my mother's language and culture made my stomach turn. Michael had always resented Linda's presence in our lives, but he'd usually been more subtle about expressing his xenophobic attitudes. The stress of the situation was stripping away his careful veneer. "I understand more Chinese than you think, Daddy," Emma said quietly. "Nai has been teaching me, and those conversations aren't foreign to me. They're about my family." Michael's response carried a sharp edge of irritation. "That's exactly what I'm talking about, Emma. Your mother and grandmother are filling your head with cultural confusion that's going to make it harder for you to fit in with other American children. Emma's voice became very small when she responded, I am American, Daddy, but I'm also Chinese. Nai says I can be both. Your grandmother says a lot of things that aren't practical in the real world, Michael snapped. What matters is that you grow up with clear identity and opportunities, not divided loyalties to cultures that will hold you back. The recording captured Emma's hurt gasp at his dismissal of her heritage. In that moment, Michael wasn't just threatening to take her away from me. He was threatening to erase a fundamental part of who she was. You don't like that I'm Chinese, Daddy? Michael's backpedaling was immediate but unconvincing. Of course I like all parts of you, sweetheart. I just think it's important that you focus on being successful in American society, and that means not getting confused by too many different cultural influences. Emma was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a sadness that broke my heart. Mommy says that being Chinese American makes me special, not confused. Your mother says a lot of things to make you feel better about your situation, Emma. But feeling good about something doesn't make it practical or beneficial for your future. The contempt in Michael's voice was unmistakable now. He wasn't just criticizing our living situation anymore. He was attacking the very foundation of Emma's identity and our family's values. Daddy, Emma said quietly, are you angry at me for not wanting to live with you? The directness of the question seemed to stop Michael short. For several seconds, the only sound on the recording was his breathing, clearly audible and increasingly labored. I'm not angry at you, sweetheart, he said finally. I'm disappointed that you can't see what I'm trying to give you. What are you trying to give me, Daddy? A better life, a real future. Opportunities that your mother's situation will never be able to provide. Emma's response was thoughtful and devastating in its simplicity. But Daddy, I already have a good life. I have people who love me exactly the way I am. Isn't that the most important thing? Michael's voice became cold in a way that made every adult in the courtroom shift uncomfortably. Love isn't enough, Emma. Love doesn't pay for college. Love doesn't provide proper housing. Love doesn't create opportunities. Love makes me feel safe, Emma said quietly. And when I don't feel safe, nothing else matters. The statement hung in the air like an accusation. Emma had identified the core issue that Michael's manipulation had been trying to obscure. Safety wasn't about material comforts or financial security. For a child, safety was about feeling protected and valued for who she was. You'll feel safer when you don't have to worry about adult problems, Michael said, his patience clearly exhausted. You'll feel safer when you live in a stable environment with consistent routines and adequate resources. I feel safe with Mommy and Nai, Emma insisted. I don't feel safe when people try to make me say things that aren't true. Michael's response was swift and sharp. Emma, you need to stop being so stubborn about this. When I tell you, something is important, you need to listen. I am listening, Daddy, but I don't agree. The simple statement of disagreement seemed to trigger something primal in Michael. His voice when he responded carried a tone I recognized with sick familiarity, the sound of his control slipping and his true nature emerging. Emma, you're 6 years old. You don't get to disagree with adults about important decisions. You don't have the knowledge or experience to understand what's at stake here. I understand that you want me to lie to the judge, so I'll have to live with you even though I don't want to, Emma said with devastating clarity. I understand that you're threatening to hurt Mommy's feelings if I don't do what you want. I understand that you don't like that I'm Chinese American. I understand more than you think I do. Each point she made was like a nail in the coffin of Michael's case. Emma had not only understood his manipulation, she'd analyzed it with a precision that would have impressed a trained therapist. Michael's response was immediate and harsh. You understand nothing, Emma. You're a child, and you're being influenced. by people who don't have your best interests at heart. Mommy and Nai have my best interests at heart, Emma said firmly. They love me for who I am, not who they want me to be. The accusation embedded in that statement seemed to enrage Michael beyond his ability to maintain any pretense of patience. When he spoke again, his voice carried the full force of the anger I remembered from our worst fights. Emma, you're going to do exactly what I've told you to do on Monday, or there will be serious consequences. Not just for you, but for your mother. Do you understand me? Emma's voice became very small, but it didn't waver. I understand that you're trying to scare me, Daddy, but I'm still not going to lie. The silence that followed was profound and terrifying. When Michael finally spoke again, his voice carried a coldness that made my blood run cold. Fine, Emma. If that's your choice, then you'll have to live with what happens next. When that judge hears about your mother's instability, when she learns about the inappropriate living conditions, when she understands that your mother is emotionally manipulating you to choose her over me, don't blame me for the consequences. Emma's response was barely audible, but it carried more dignity than Michael had shown throughout the entire conversation. I won't blame you for the consequences, Daddy, but I won't blame myself for telling the truth either. The recording continued for several more minutes, with Michael making increasingly desperate attempts to break down Emma's resolve. He tried guilt, telling her how disappointed he was. He tried fear, describing the terrible things that would happen to our family if she didn't comply. He tried bribery, promising elaborate trips and expensive gifts if she would just say what he wanted her to say. Through it all, Emma remained quietly steadfast. She didn't argue or fight back. She simply continued to state her truth with the unshakable certainty of someone who knew exactly who she was and what she believed. Finally, the recording captured the sound of Michael giving up. Fine, he said, his voice bitter with defeat. We'll see what happens on Monday. But remember, Emma, when your world falls apart because of your stubbornness, you chose this. I didn't choose for you to be mean, Daddy, Emma said quietly. I just chose to tell the truth. The recording ended with the sound of a door slamming, and Emma's quiet breathing as she turned off the device. Judge Williams set the iPad down carefully and looked around the courtroom. The silence was complete, except for the sound of the court reporter's fingers moving across her machine and the distant hum of traffic outside. Mr. Rodriguez, Judge Williams said, her voice carrying a gravity that made everyone in the room sit up straighter. I have just heard nearly 40 minutes of you systematically attempting to coach your 6-year-old daughter to lie in court proceedings. I have heard you threaten her, manipulate her, and attempt to undermine her relationship with her mother and her cultural identity. Michael's face had gone gray. His lawyer was frantically scribbling notes, probably trying to figure out if there was any way to minimize the damage from what we'd all just heard. Furthermore, Judge Williams continued, I have heard your daughter demonstrate remarkable integrity and courage in the face of sustained pressure from an adult who should have been protecting her, not manipulating her. Emma, you have shown more wisdom and moral clarity than many adults I encounter in this courtroom. Emma squeezed my hand tightly, but didn't say anything. She seemed to understand that the adults were handling things now, and her job was done. Judge Williams turned back to Michael with an expression of barely controlled disgust. Mr. Rodriguez, in 23 years on the bench, I have rarely encountered such a clear example of parental manipulation and emotional abuse. Your behavior as documented in this recording demonstrates a fundamental unfitness for custody of any minor child. Rebecca Stone rose from her chair, clearly preparing to attempt some form of damage control. Your Honor, if I may— You may not, Judge Williams cut her off sharply. There is nothing you can say that will mitigate what this court has just heard. Your client has demonstrated through his own words that he is willing to emotionally manipulate a child, threaten her sense of security, and undermine her relationship with her mother in order to achieve his desired outcome. She turned to address the entire courtroom. This case is concluded. Full physical and legal custody of Emma Chen is awarded to her mother, Sarah Chen. Mr. Rodriguez's parental rights are hereby suspended pending a comprehensive psychological evaluation and completion of a court-approved parenting education program. Michael shot to his feet, his composure finally cracking completely. Your Honor, this is outrageous. One recording taken out of context cannot— Sit down, Mr. Rodriguez, Judge Williams commanded. The recording was not taken out of context. It was a sustained 40-minute attempt to corrupt a child's testimony through threats and manipulation. If you speak again without being addressed directly, I will hold you in contempt of court. Michael sank back into his chair, his face, a mask of barely controlled rage. I could see the effort it was costing him to remain silent, and I was grateful for the security presence in the courtroom. Additionally, Judge Williams continued, this court is ordering that any future contact between Mr. Rodriguez and the minor child must be supervised by a court-appointed guardian. These visits will not commence until Mr. Rodriguez has completed the required evaluation and education programs to the satisfaction of this court. She turned to Emma with a gentle expression. Emma, you have been incredibly brave today. What? You did require tremendous courage, and you should be very proud of yourself for telling the truth even when it was difficult. Emma nodded solemnly. Thank you, Your Honor. I just wanted everyone to know what really happened. They do now, sweetheart. And because of your courage, this court has been able to make a decision based on truth rather than manipulation. Judge Williams gathered her papers and stood. This case is closed. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through the courtroom like a gunshot. For a moment, nobody moved. Then David Park was shaking my hand and congratulating me. Emma was hugging my waist, and I could hear Michael's angry whispers to his lawyer as they packed up their materials. We had won. Not just the case, but something much more important. Emma had found her voice and used it to speak truth in the face of pressure that would have broken many adults. She had protected herself and me with nothing but her integrity, and the small recording device my mother had given her for educational games. As we walked out of the courthouse into the bright Oregon sunshine, Emma looked up at me with eyes that seemed older and wiser than they had that morning. Mommy, she said, I'm glad I told the truth. Me too, baby, I replied, pulling her close. I'm so proud of you. Are you proud that I was brave, or proud that I was right? The question made me smile through my tears. I'm proud that you were you, Emma. Exactly who you are. My mother was waiting for us on the courthouse steps, her face bright with relief and pride. She swept Emma into her arms and said something in Mandarin that made Emma giggle. Then she looked at me with tears in her eyes. Your daughter is very strong, she said in her accented English. Like her mother, like her grandmother. She's stronger than all of us, I replied, watching Emma spin around in the sunshine with her arms spread wide. That evening, we celebrated, with takeout Chinese food and Emma's favorite ice cream. As we sat around our small kitchen table in our cramped but love-filled apartment, Emma looked up from her fortune cookie and asked, Mommy, what happens now? Now we keep living our life, I told her. Just like we have been, but without having to worry about court anymore. And I don't have to see Daddy until he learns how to be nice? The simplicity of her understanding made me smile. That's right, baby. Not until he learns how to be safe for you to be around. Emma nodded thoughtfully and went back to her ice cream. For her, the complex legal proceeding had been reduced to its essential truth. She had been protected from someone who wasn't treating her well, and now she could continue living with the people who loved her unconditionally. Later that night, as I tucked Emma into our shared bed, she looked up at me with serious eyes. Mommy, do you think Daddy will ever learn how to be nice? I considered my answer carefully. I don't know, sweetheart. But I know that whether he does or not, You'll be safe and loved here with me and Nai. That's all I really wanted, Emma said, snuggling closer to me. Just to be safe and loved. As I listened to her breathing slow and deepen into sleep, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought us to this moment. My 6-year-old daughter had accomplished something that lawyers and judges and social workers often struggle to achieve. She had cut through manipulation and fear to speak simple truth in a complex situation. Emma had saved us both, not through any grand gesture or dramatic confrontation, but through the quiet courage of refusing to abandon her integrity, even when pressured by someone she loved. She had shown me that sometimes the most powerful response to manipulation is simply to tell the truth and trust that truth will be enough. The recording that had changed everything was still on her iPad, stored alongside her practice reading sessions and silly songs. But Emma had moved on from that difficult weekend to more typical 6-year-old pursuits. She was already planning her next artistic project and asking my mother to teach her new Chinese words. Our life wasn't perfect. We still lived in a small apartment. I still worked multiple jobs, and we still worried about money sometimes. But we were free to be ourselves, Chinese American, working class, unconventional, and deeply loving. Emma was free to grow up bilingual and bicultural, to learn from her grandmother's wisdom while navigating her American childhood. Most importantly, Emma was free to trust her own voice and her own moral compass. She had learned that telling the truth, even when it's scary, is always the right choice. She had learned that love and safety are more important than material comfort, and she had learned that even 6-year-olds have power when they choose to use it wisely. As I drifted off to sleep beside my daughter in our small but sufficient bed, I thought about the woman I had become through this process. I was no longer the frightened, controlled person who had lived with Michael for 8 years. I was someone who had fought for my child and won. Someone who had trusted my daughter's strength and been rewarded with her courage. Emma had taught me that sometimes the smallest voices speak the loudest truths, and that sometimes the most important battles are won not through force or manipulation, but through the simple act of refusing to lie when everyone around you wants you to. She had shown me that integrity isn't just a nice idea. It's a practical tool that can change the world, one truth at a time. Our story didn't end in that courtroom. It continued the next morning when Emma woke up safe in her own bed, ready for another day of being exactly who she was meant to be. It continued when my mother made pancakes and Emma practiced her Chinese while I got ready for work. It continued in all the small, ordinary moments that make up a life lived in freedom and truth. But if our story had a lesson, it would be this. Never underestimate the power of a child who knows who she is and isn't afraid to say so. Never underestimate the strength that comes from being loved unconditionally. And never underestimate the impact of telling the truth, even when, especially when, it's the hardest thing you've ever had to do. Emma had given us all a masterclass in courage, and the rest of us were still trying to catch up. But that was okay. We had time now, all the time in the world, to learn from her example and to build a life worthy of the truth she had been brave enough to speak. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.